Mornings in Joseon start early. A man stretches while others do martial arts training. A noise is heard inside a carriage. Someone wonders whether to mention they've arrived early. He begins walking around the palace and encounters a mysterious figure inside. He gives a slight smile as he listens to what's happening outside. The palace guards train with dumbbells in front of the gate. One guard asks the crown prince if he's there for his morning exercise, and he confirms, asking to open the gate. It's opened and the prince prepares to enter. Inside, several people train with weightlifting equipment, and two men talk about their results. One says he didn't recognize the other because he lost so much weight, and the other compliments his colleague on his muscle gain, commenting on his broadened shoulders. They then start posing, boasting about their bodybuilding. The prince looks to the side and notices something. A man appears extremely exhausted, saying he's only halfway there, wondering why it took him so long to reach halfway. The prince also observes a man bench pressing with all his strength, pushing himself to the max. He notices another squatting with heavy weights, everyone giving their all. He wears a psychopathic expression, thinking their muscles are being perfected. In his past as a bodybuilding instructor, there was nothing he wanted more than this. Choi Young-jik, a common young man from the Republic of Korea who studied food and nutrition in college just to become a complete fitness coach. He first learned weightlifting in the military, being in a frontline unit with no recreational activities. Naturally, going to the gym became his only solace, and even after returning to college, he didn't give up his workouts. People in his history class wondered what a physical education teacher was doing there. And as the semesters passed, our Korean Ronnie Coleman kept getting bigger. Anyway, thanks to that, he got his Class 1 certificate. It was the occasion that sparked a celebration with his friends. If there was anything different from usual, it was him drinking alcohol, which he normally avoided for the sake of his muscles. In his room, Choi snacks while wondering whether to watch YouTube before bed. One of the recommended videos is the reason why the great King Sejong had a short life. Choi thinks it's because he didn't exercise. Already drunk, Choi reflects on what life would be like for a bodybuilder back then. Because of this idea before bed, we'll see the history of Joseon being rewritten by a bodybuilding enthusiast. He fell asleep drunk, thinking it would be really fun. After his sleep, someone says the crown prince must wake up. Choi opens his eyes in pain, wondering where his foeman is. But he notices something different when he hears the rooster's crow. He gets up, believing he actually drank too much. But upon noticing his hand, he realizes he's in a different place and wonders why he hasn't woken up properly yet. But now that was his reality. Choi seems confused by the situation and lets out a scream that echoes everywhere. A servant says the crown prince must wake up now, sighing in front of his quarters. Choi wonders why this is happening. He regrets becoming an anchovy. Choi becomes desperate, trying to deny reality. But he ends up opening the door and one of his servants greets him. He looks outside his residence and asks about his name. The servant doesn't understand the question but informs that his personal name is Yu and Suji is his courtesy name. Choi asks if his father's birth name is Yi-do, and the servant confirms. Yi-do, the fourth king of Joseon, also known popularly as King Sejong the Great. If his father is King Sejong and his name is Yi-do, in history, he is known as the Great Prince Suang. Finally, he is outraged to have ended up in the Joseon era. The protagonist thinks everything seems very real and must have really gone back in time. Someone calls for His Majesty, stating that Prince Jinyang is entering. Although it's natural to be nervous when encountering something unknown, the thought of seeing that person made Choi's heart race. The most important person held in high regard by all Korean citizens. He's about to have an audience with the great King Sejong, and as a history student, this is an exciting moment. While His Majesty welcomed him, our hero couldn't stop thinking about how everything about him was good. But reality sets in when His Majesty says the reason he called him is to give an order, and thus we are introduced to an extremely overweight version of the king. He asks where the prince is looking and questions if he's a bit sleepy. When asked what the problem is, the prince apologizes. He says that since the king has carried out numerous benevolent actions in handling state affairs, he has been considering what kind of decree he wants to consider for an inexperienced and careless child like him. The king asserts not to say he's inexperienced and says he values the prince's talents, so he plans to appoint him as a provincial governor. The king asks him to go to the nobles' hall and rewrite the books in uppercase letters, and the prince affirms he will obey the orders. Already in the Hall of Nobles, Choi thinks he finally had the chance to visit this hall, and someone informs that the books rewritten by him will be even more valuable. Our prince asks not to praise him too much, and that his brother's handwriting is much better than his, and the servant says it's kind of him. In his thoughts, Choi believes he not only understands their speech but also the written characters. It seems that the memories of the original body's owner remained. Choi then reads and realizes that the letters in the books are not small, but the king said they cannot be easily seen. About the great King Sejong, after the protagonist's observation, he diagnoses him as severely obese with an BMI greater than 35. Furthermore, his face is excessively swollen, and despite the cold morning air, he was sweating. In conclusion, diabetes or impaired glucose tolerance, this is the pre-diabetes stage. He thinks this situation is clear because later in history, King Sejong will pass away. In the end, Danjong becomes king, so he thinks he won't let that happen. A man approaches, catching the prince's attention, and says it's strange coming from him considering his preference for living in the mountains. This is his older brother. Choi asks what brings him there, and his brother explains that he is there to check the books their father will read in advance. He asks him not to mind him and to continue what he's doing. Choi tells his brother that he read after a long time, so some were difficult to read due to their small letters. And he explains that he received the order to rewrite the books with reasonably large letters. His brother says it seems there's a different intention in his words and asks if he also noticed their father's presbyopia. Choi asserts he was just guessing. His brother says he's usually arrogant about such things but changed in a short period. Choi asks since when his father's symptoms started, and his brother replies it was about a year ago, and that it's different from common presbyopia. No one knows about it yet, so his brother asks to keep it a secret. Choi wonders if he acted naturally, and his brother leaves. He thinks he was nervous during that conversation, and that the back of his neck is now stiff. He then makes some movements and puts his joints in place, thinking how wonderful it is. A man there asks what the prince is doing, and that if his neck hurts, he should massage it instead of moving like that. Choi then realizes the men don't know stretching. At this time, there are doctors who can give massages, but they're not very effective. Due to a lack of knowledge in anatomy, it's natural not to understand the relationship between muscle shapes. He thinks he should explain to them in an easier way and asserts that he strained his neck while horseback riding some time ago. He suffered because his neck was stiff, but when he moved his back, he realized something loosened. And now, asking them to look at him, he asserts that what he's doing is effective. Everyone then starts a stretching session, which ends very well, leaving those two men on cloud 9. The next day, people talked about the stretching techniques taught. Someone comments that their neck, which was as stiff as a rock, now moves again and remarks that they don't need to go to the doctor anymore. The modern stretching methods that Prince Suyang taught quickly spread among the scholars in the nobles' hall, but the great prince's greatest concern remains. In wooden and thatched tents, someone asks if anyone is there, while the protagonist walks with a woman who tells him to come out and greet their guests. The cabin owner notices the arrival of the great prince and asks what matter they have to discuss there. Our protagonist informs that he's there to buy oil and is looking for one with sesame, but not perilla or paulownia oil. The man informs that besides sesame oil, they only have soybean oil, which will cost 3 mals, and Choi affirms he'll give him 5 mals with the low-quality oil they have. His servant thinks earlier he bought various random things and can't understand what the prince plans. Our prince thinks if his memory doesn't fail him, he died of severe dermatitis, and until he finds a way back to his time, he must find a solution for it as soon as possible. The men inform that they've arrived, and the prince praises them for the good work. While he thinks, a woman interrupts, saying it seems he's been visiting the village frequently. Choi says his wife is right about what she comments. However, the idea of having a wife is still not clear to him, and she introduces herself, curious about his strange behaviors. Choi stated he was reading a book in the library and found out that in the ancient Song dynasty, there was a device for bathing. Meanwhile, he thinks he needs to act naturally. The wife questions about it while he asserts he's trying to and doesn't seem like a bad idea. What Choi needs most after coming to the Joseon era is soap. If a modern person doesn't properly wash clothes after exercising, they can suffer several skin consequences. Even in the Joseon era, you can't do weightlifting without soap because how many and how terrible would the skin diseases that could arise be? In his time on Earth, Choi used to work in a gym and already had the experience of making soap. His landlady grandmother made a different soap, saying she didn't trust market soaps. The recipe was surprisingly simple. Just mix water with burnt straw ashes and natural olive oil and add powdered herbs to heat them. With this method, even in the Joseon era, it's possible to make soap. The woman asserts that oil dirties the body, and she would have never imagined that the material for washing the body would be oil. Choi says he's determined to try various things. The book states that boiling water from bush sprouts completely removes stains from clothes, and even tough stains are eliminated. His wife then falls silent and leaves, saying she hopes it really works that way. Choi, in turn, thinks about what's happening and believes the harmony doesn't seem good. On another morning of the location, soap making begins by Choi. He thinks the saponification process is a success for now, and to find the perfect ratio, he has to keep experimenting. However, just by looking, it doesn't look much like soap, and Choi wonders how effective it will be in cleaning. So he decides to try it first and realizes there's still a lot to improve, but the cleaning ability is acceptable. Although the main ingredient is sesame oil, so the smell isn't very pleasant. He thinks that if he solves the smell problem, it'll be possible to produce on a large scale and wonders if he can end up selling abundantly in the Ming dynasty. The next destination now is King Sejong's health. It's said that even King Taejong, known for his strict approach, gave up trying to make King Sejong exercise. For a king who doesn't listen to his own father, a second son who's not even the crown prince trying to make him exercise would make him extremely irritated. Thinking that in the end, to convince the king, he must logically convince him. Choi realizes even his physical form is a problem and can't teach weightlifting with a body like that. To increase persuasion, he must achieve a 400 kilograms lift in the 3 main disciplines and about 670 pounds in muscle mass, making a pose in the middle of the bath that leaves people in the place confused. The next step is to turn weightlifting into an academic discipline and create a book containing that history. Choi thinks of a saying that mentions prestige and good reputation. If they improve the bodies inherited from their parents, this would be filial. So he'll make a book that records the discipline of building oneself and shaping the body, named Bodybuilding Secretary. Later in the palace, the prince began to exercise by doing pull-ups on a piece of wood connected to a door. After finishing his session, he wonders what talented body it is. In addition to pull-ups, he also did dips, push-ups, and even the dragon flag. He thinks that for the other parts, at least there's some talent, but the core strength and pulling are beyond the reach of ordinary people. It's impressive that he can do 15 push-ups in a row without getting tired even with this excess abdominal fat. Then thinking if it's true that his lineage won't go anywhere. The servants inform that the materials the prince ordered have arrived. Choi ordered dumbbells, and the man says it's reassuring to hear that he liked it, especially since it's the first time he's done it. The prince is very happy as the men leave the room. They talk among themselves that Prince Jinyang has finally gone mad because spending 80 acres of rice to buy those cast irons is a horrible decision. He states that even in the samurai family there is no need for so much iron, but he concludes that perhaps the prince is recruiting soldiers, and his colleague asks him to speak quietly and be careful what he says around people because they only need money in circulation. Choi thinks that his calisthenic exercise so far hasn't made much of a difference, but it will be different with this much iron. The wife's servant tells her that even though she is royalty, it's an exaggeration, and asks if her lady will just watch, but is cut off by her. The servant asks why she doesn't try washing her body with oil and criticizes the protagonist's decision to spend 80 acres on a bunch of iron. The prince's wife thought he was obsessed with hunting for a long time, but now he was obsessed with strange objects and doesn't know what she did wrong. She then tells her to stop saying those things, leaving her servant a little embarrassed. She reminisces about good memories with the prince, like the day he handed her a rose, but today it's not the same anymore, and she cuts one of the roses she had received, thinking she wants to sleep early this day and doesn't need attention from others. The woman then starts to take her bath and observes the soap made by the prince. She wonders if she should wash her body with it and decides to try it once, thus passing the soap over all parts of her body and realizing that it was very different from the usual. Choi came out of his bath thinking he really needed to lift weights to feel like he had exercised. Suddenly, he hears a noise and asks who's there. He realizes it's his wife, and she comments that the soap called Dirt Remover is great, but the strong smell of sesame oil is a problem, and if she bathes with it every day, someone might mistake her for an oil vendor's wife. Choi then asks if it would be better to use pig oil or beef oil, but remembers that it is a very expensive product and with a not-so-different smell. Instead of selling to the Ming dynasty, this will become an exclusive business for the nobles of the Joseon dynasty. He says he found an easy solution to solve that and asks what she thinks of mixing camellia oil, affirming enthusiastically that it will surely have a better smell than sesame oil, thanking his wife and leaving her blushing. In the Gakon region, a man greets the great General Jin Yang. Our prince says the man's face is engraved in his memory and asks if he participated in the hunt last winter. Trying to drive the deer out of the thicket, the man's body was very hurt. People went through a lot of difficulties, and now the prince came to compensate even if it's late. Choi says he would give him his silver, but it seemed wrong and states that for his house, every 15 days, 2 bags of rice and eggs will be sent along with chicken meat and more things. Our prince asks him to make sure to use this especially with his family, and the grateful man asks how he could repay for the kindness. Choi, in turn, states that there is no need to repay, just to inform every fortnight the growth and weight of his children. He promised to provide food for 20 families, and with that, he recorded the weight and height of the children, giving a balanced diet focusing on proteins for 10 of them. And for the other half, a diet focusing on carbohydrates and fats is provided. Next, changes in the physical shape and mutual abilities of the children will be recorded to use them as reference data. In his thoughts, Choi gained an advantage over his father when he convinces him to exercise. A blacksmith hammers on a sword while the protagonist asks a man if he can do what's on paper. The man says he can't read but understands numbers, and a round piece of iron weighs 30 kilograms, the same weight as 3 lids of the Warsaw-style pot. He asks if the protagonist plans to fit them on a pointed pin, which Choi confirms. He asks if this means that 4 will be placed on each side, and is shocked to think that if there are 8, it will be 240 kilograms. The prince says that to be honest, in the end, an even more powerful weight will be needed, and that this bar must support at least 300 kilograms. Our prince then takes a paper from his body and tells the man to wrap the iron plate in a bar about 3 feet long. Our prince thinks that is interesting, and with the technical capabilities of this era, maybe it is possible to make a gun. A man says he believes His Majesty will certainly appreciate the invention as it deserves. Our protagonist thinks that since he took over this body, the prince's image has improved, and in this case, he is there exactly to restore order. Suddenly, the prince's attention turns to the man next to him. By activating the coach's eye, he realizes that the man has a standard body constitution, excellent shoulders and triceps, wide muscles resistant in the back, dense muscles in the shoulders and trapezius. Choi thinks this guy is an illegitimate son, so he can't become an officer. However, he is the ideal candidate for the initial tests. Choi says he wants the man to become his first student on the path to the perfection of the body, and if everything goes well, he will have no rivals in the entire ocean. The man fills with happiness, believing he has gained an advantage, and asks how he can thank his lord. Choi, in turn, says there is no need and just to trust him, thinking that the man doesn't even suspect what he's getting into. In his quarters, the crown prince is summoned by our hero. He wonders if Choi really came, and Choi confirms that he did. The crown prince analyzes our hero's body and says he has noticed many improvements and is curious about where this encounter will lead. Choi says that apparently creating new training methods instead of hunting improves his body, and that he actually came because he would like the prince to take a look at something. The crown prince asks about the new training method and what it would be. Our hero then presents the soap. The crown prince says that it is truly a miraculous substance that removes contaminations. However, the price of camellia oil is very high. But if it were just an expensive oil, it would be a waste of rice. So depending on the manufacturing process, it can become quite economical. The crown prince asks to borrow the brush for a minute and says he understands. Our protagonist suggests that he managed to get rid of dirt with the help of the soap created by Prince Jin Yang. And to avoid dirtying the books, all employees should wash their hands with it in the morning and at night. The crown prince says that in his opinion, despite the high cost of the soap, almost everyone will be able to afford to use it. But considering the novelty of the product, people still won't buy it. Our prince then asks if he plans to force all employees to use it. However, it is denied by the crown prince, who says it will be better to present it in a way that hints at the benefits so that they will want to use it on their own. Choi thinks that this will be like a free sample currently. The crown prince says it is easier to distribute widely if private negotiations begin, and then a tax can be introduced on it, which will be a new source of income. Choi thinks the tax is really a good idea and that it's not for nothing after all. He is the first son of the great Sejong and the future King Munjong. In the blacksmith's hut, a man asks if they are sure that the great Prince Jinyang ordered that, and the men affirm that they are. The man asserts that they know what will happen if they make a mistake, and the blacksmith wishes the lord a good trip. One of the blacksmiths asserts that the items ordered by the great General Jinyang must be immediately melted down and destroyed, but the other says that the deadlines are approaching and the damages will be colossal. His colleague, however, questions if for him coins are worth more than life, and if they are, then he should proceed, affirming that they do not know the prince's intention in making these iron bars. The wanderers from before continue through the village, and it is reported that the second prince is unable to deserve the right of succession, but has spent a large amount of resources on buying iron. For days on end, he has been forging his body, so Prince Jin Yang must be finally showing his true nature. A man comments if the other saw that. He says that when he washed his hands using a product called soap, the ink stains disappeared and the oil from his face also easily removed, thinking it is truly a miraculous substance. They wonder who came up with that idea, and one of them says it must have been the crown prince. One of them comments that the credits go to Prince Jinyang, and people seem not to believe. Choi trains his body doing a flat bench press. His servant helps with the spotting while his repetitions already reach 9. He then thinks he can do a bench press with 45 kilograms for 10 repetitions. Choi puts away the weight and the servant says he is already very skilled in this exercise. The prince then begins a motivational speech and thinks that even though he remembers rusty dumbbells from a neighborhood gym, the benefits are massive. However, with production, they faced many difficulties. The blacksmith ended up refunding the money because he said there were certain unforeseen circumstances in making the remaining equipment. They not only failed to complete on time, but also missed the design. Choi then says now it's his servant's turn. The servant despairs, affirming that if he takes that weight, he will be crushed to death. However, the prince does not want to debate and affirms that he needs to stimulate his body with a scary face. Choi then gives training tips while the servant struggles. His wife approaches, thinking that before he was skinny, but now his body is radiating strength, and her servant compares him to General Wonbano. The prince is distracted from the exercise and asks if what his wife is saying is true. He heard that he is a true hero from a young age and in maturity, distinguished himself in the role of general, thinking then if he should implement a fee for military training. While his servant almost dies in the bench press, the prince affirms that a weapon alone is not enough for victory. Suddenly, a noise at the gate catches everyone's attention. Choi wonders who dares to enter so brazenly through the gates of his house. It's the wanderers from before. They enter the place with serious faces and go towards the prince. The wife asks what's happening and if they know that property belongs to Prince Jinyang. One of the men in a frightening manner says that they are already aware, and that if she is the man's wife, she should have the courtesy to stay silent. She then prepares to submit, but our hero steps forward, knocking the man down. Fallen on the ground, he asks how he was knocked down so easily, and the prince says not to lay their dirty hands on his wife. The samurai then prepare to draw their swords, but their chief calms them down and introduces himself, saying it's a pleasure to see him again after last year's hunting tournament. Our prince asks what's going on, and if they dare to touch his men, things will get ugly. One of the samurai shouts, asking if he forgot his mistakes, and the chief comments on the object he holds, capable of producing 20 swords, then questioning what he will do with 400 swords. The man helped before is tied up and made hostage. That chief comments that 7 months ago, nobody was interested in him and out of nowhere started helping the poor, asking if he wants to lead them to a rebellion. The prince affirms they are just assumptions and says that bringing in soldiers based on that is an abuse of power. The man asserts there is no need for proof and that gossip spreads quickly, then asks if he remembers that they always act like this, and in the end everything that is secret becomes evident. Choi asks what will happen if he is wrong, but the chief is certain of his opinions, affirming that he will interrogate everyone around them. Choi thinks about detention and interrogation, and even if he declares his innocence, they won't calm down. This is a typical investigation of enmity. After all, he hasn't done anything wrong since taking over the prince's body and doesn't know what intrigues they had before his appearance. He then takes a deep breath and wonders what he should do now. Suddenly, someone arrives and asks what's going on there. Choi is surprised and realizes it's his brother. The crown prince says he came personally because the bad rumors about him have spread everywhere. He stated that he believed he had found a way to train his body, while the samurais ask him to stay away from this madman. The first prince then questions whether Choi is mad, telling him to be more careful with his words because he is not a madman. Everywhere there are those discontented with someone using wealth for personal purposes, but he will give his brother a chance to explain himself. However, even though they are family, getting rid of these rumors will be difficult, so strong arguments will be needed. Finally, he says that if the accusations are false, there will be no escape. He won't be able to get away so easily. The crown prince affirms that if he accuses his brother and cannot prove it, he won't get away with it. Our prince then pounds his bar on the ground and says he needs help, asking his servant to bring that book. He says he has a valid reason for creating all this, and it's about developing education about a healthy lifestyle. Choi hands the book to the prince and asks him to familiarize himself with the information. The first prince starts reading and sees that the philosophy seems to make sense. However, he still doesn't understand the need for so much investment in it, asking why so much is being spent on the healing method. Choi approaches his brother's ear and says that the older brother knows that their father is growing weaker every day. The brother says that only presbyopia has caught up with him earlier, so there's no need to worry so much, and that if he has any knowledge of medicine, he should clarify. Choi asserts that recently their father has been afflicted by a fever, and despite the cool weather, sweat pours abundantly down his face. Our protagonist states that he doesn't want to jump to conclusions, but he suspects that he has diabetes. He believes that the cause may be an excess of yang energy, and also the fact that His Majesty overeats. Since he does not engage in physical activities, the yang energy cannot be released. Therefore, a significant part of the problem manifests itself through a disease that affects his eyes. The first prince, in turn, questions about assistance to the poor, asking if that is also related to their father. Choi asserts that it was all for his research and says that in his book, all topics related to nutrition and exercises are recorded. He states that he wants to convince their father of what is written. The first prince then shouts that from what he heard, Prince Jingyang is innocent. However, the chief samurai says that it won't work because conducting investigations and trials is his duty. He says that His Majesty will not be pleased with his rights being challenged, asserting that competent inspectors of various ranks have gathered there. The chief then asks if he wants him to simply obey the command or set an example for his soldiers, and that if he wants to expel them from there, he will have to start by expelling him. The man tells the heir that covering up for someone just because of ties is wrong because he will be the future king, telling him to be resolute and show the world the greatness of his country's laws. Li Suk-chae did not simply reach the position of chief inspector. Now this problem concerns not only the two of them, since he involved the crown prince in all of this. Seeing that there is nothing to be done, the crown prince asks him to explain the reason for buying everything. Since that's the case, Choi says he will personally show it to him, proving it with all his might. In the king's body, yang energy has accumulated, which affected his vision, resulting in presbyopia, but he believes he can overcome diseases by strengthening the body. Everyone knows that Your Majesty spares no physical effort. However, if we demonstrate to him an unprecedented power, he will be interested. If we show strength equivalent to the achievements of Yan Yu, he may abandon his skepticism. Choi then says that if he can't convince them, he won't convince his father. The crown prince again draws everyone's attention, explaining that Prince Jingyang has been developing healing methods for the people, and these adaptations were created for this purpose. The chief asks if he's really using that for training, wondering about a piece of iron that weighs more than a sturdy pot. The prince says he just realized that maybe the purchase of everything was for the inspection. And if he's right, why not allow the young man to demonstrate his abilities to clear his name? One of the samurais then says he will check because in strength he is the best, and if the prince loses, it will be clear that he lied. Choi then stretches and prepares for the competition. The two lie down on the bench press, and Choi explains about the exercise, giving details on how to do it correctly. The soldier asks if it's not just a matter of strength and if the prince is afraid of losing. The man then takes a deep breath, exerting tremendous force, and realizes that it's actually heavier than it seems, but he can't fail, dedicating himself to the maximum to lift that bar. He manages to complete one repetition. The guard who is spotting thinks about what to expect now and looks at the prince, but realizes that he is still in the middle of the movement. The soldier then mocks him, saying he pretended to be strong but is shedding tears. However, everyone's expression changes, realizing something incredible. Choi did his bench press up to the 10th repetition. After finishing his set, His servant says it was amazing, and the soldier thinks it's unbelievable that he lost a strength competition. Choi asserts that in physical fitness training, the number of repetitions depends on the training goal, and says he can lift up to 105 kilograms at once, which impresses everyone. That soldier says it's absurd because even though he won the competition, that's unreal. The chief inspector then says they're leaving for today, but that doesn't mean the prince is out of suspicion. He will then continue to do his job with all his effort. Choi, with a confident look, asserts that he will do the same, and thinks that anyway, he is out of immediate danger now, and the older brother is now aware of the king's illness. The crown prince says he will also withdraw, and Choi wishes him to take care. He remembers that his older brother said he would help him with the elaboration of his book, and that in the end, everything turned out well. Addressing his wife, Choi apologizes, but she expresses embarrassment for not recognizing the good intention earlier. While stating that he won't let something like this happen again, he embraces her. This leaves her extremely embarrassed in front of others at the location. She asserts that they can't do such a thing there and should go to their room, making Choi even more ashamed. One of the inspection members apologizes for what happened and says he will take responsibility. However, the chief explains that it's not like they didn't gain anything. The chief says that among those devices is an unusually thin and hollow item that resembles Chongtong. He then asks if he's improving the Si Chongtong to develop a new firearm, and that a year ago during the hunting contest, he clearly saw the true intentions of that beast. Would that Prince Jinyang be creating the Secretary of Corporal Constitution as a final act of pity? That's ridiculous, so the chief says he'll keep an eye out to find out what he's really hiding. While Prince Jinyang continues his daily life as usual, after a few days, news came that the forge resumed construction of the devices. And then 3 months later, his wife surprises Choi by saying she went to the doctor and that she's pregnant. She said she thinks she got pregnant that day. Choi remembers a conversation with a friend at the bar where he said he didn't have time to work out. Choi then asserts to trust him and that his friend's life would change if he exercised. But the friend says it's nonsense and doesn't want to be bothered by someone who hasn't even married until 40. Our protagonist then says he has 2 wives and remembers his barbell and dumbbell. Just a few days ago, that was his life, but now he would be a father. Choi lifts his wife by the waist, questioning the information with happiness, and he suggests that they inform His Majesty of this news, and his wife says it gives her immense pleasure to see him so happy. She asserts that she has to give birth to a healthy child, so she also wants to learn the Secretary of Corporal Construction. Choi then begins his wife's training with a simple posture, asking her to inhale and exhale. He thinks that stretching is not enough for a safe childbirth, and that after giving birth, the crown princess died from pleural fever. That's how maternal fetal death happens, but he thinks that using it for disinfection can be very helpful. Someone informs them that they have a guest, and a man asks if he calls that sojigori. The old man said he had no idea it was possible to produce distilled liquor in this way. Choi asserts that the design was developed by him and that he wants to obtain pure alcohol, so he made this thin and elongated part. The second prince asks them to bring all the soju inside his house. Later, Choi understands that now that the distillation is ready, he has to check the purity of the alcohol. There are 2 glasses with the same weight, but one of them was filled with water up to 80%. The relative density of alcohol is 0.8, so if the filtered alcohol is heavier or lighter than water, it means he failed. The 2 bodies then begin to adjust on the scale and finally reach the balance point, which leaves them both very happy. The disinfectant production was successful. It's been a long time since our protagonist arrived in the Joseon era. He often thought he would return to the modern era if he exercised, but that was just something in his head. He even wondered what happened in the present where he originally lived, and although many questions remained. After his child was born, he was fully absorbed in his life in Joseon. In the palace, it is commented that Prince Jinyang has recently made a great achievement. The king says he distributed soap among the population, enriching the royal treasury, and invented a disinfectant that helps with wounds, which leaves Choi grateful, but he asserts that he still has much to learn. Sujong asserts that he doesn't need to be so humble, and that he will give him 200 silver nyangs as compensation. Recently, Prince Jin had his first child, and the princess returned to her normal life in a week, proving the effectiveness of the disinfectant. The king asserts that from now on, the disinfectant will be used to treat all mothers and newborns. He is proud of his son because he once thought he was just a sore spot, but Jin has shown maturity. As he looks at him, the king's eyes gradually close until he passes out. People despair around the king, clamoring for a doctor to be called. This year is March 1438, and Sejong's illness suddenly worsened. The crown prince says the king's illness worsened, and fortunately, he recovered quickly, but the unease remains. When asked how he is now, he says thirst makes him drink a lot of water, and his vision has deteriorated a lot. Even the decoction had no positive effect. Choi asks his brother if the father has mentioned symptoms, things like seeing a fog and insects around. This is something his grandfather mentioned one day when he suffered from diabetes. His brother says he never mentioned such symptoms, but says it's frustrating not being able to see things from afar. Choi asserts that in this case, it's not so serious yet, and that this symptom may be a consequence of overwork. But he thinks they can't be at ease because with this type of disease, if nothing is done, it will be like in the story, and in a year, the great King Sejong will lose his vision due to complications. Mentioning that his mother's birthday is this September, he asserts that he will create an opportunity to change his father's mind on that day. His brother asks what the hell he's planning to do at a royal banquet, and Choi explains that in the Corporal Construction Secretary there are 3 exercises that use heavy weights. Squat, bench press, and deadlift are called the big 3 exercises. At his mother's birthday banquet, he will perform a total of 375 kilograms in the 3 exercises. The Crown Prince asks if that isn't ridiculous, because the palace guards who were ordered to try couldn't even lift 225 kilograms. Choi asserts that at the moment he can't lift that weight yet, but he will surely succeed for the sake of his father. The brother says that if that's his will, he will do everything to help, and Choi asserts that he wants to create a book that his father will be pleased with. His brother, however, says that he should also dedicate himself to studies, which makes Choi confused. The brother says that since he wrote a book, he should incorporate the content of all 13 classics. Choi tries to maintain composure but thinks he's screwed to do that, but that's to save the great King Sejong. So finally, Choi says that his brother can count on him, and that when he reaches 375 kilograms in the Big 3, they will bring up the topic of the book in front of their father and ensure he tries their method. They then argue for their father's well-being. Choi thinks he's about to take on something really crazy because increasing by a few percent in 6 months is already questionable. But even if he succeeds, this body loaded with fat won't be a convincing argument. He believes that to showcase his muscles in all their glory, he needs to lose about 3 kilograms of fat. And the best way to burn calories in this era is walking. He hopes the unlimited potential of this body will be useful. Back at home, he reads the books his brother requested while pondering his exhausting routine. While contemplating giving up, he imagines what his brother would say to him. Choi understands he can't complain at this moment. With his meal on the table, his wife asks if it's acceptable for him. She explains that oatmeal is something eaten to fill the stomach, and Choi asserts that he must prove himself at his mother's birthday. While talking about his extra fat, he asserts that he will eat until his filial piety is proven. His wife says she can't understand her husband's ambition, and fearing the porridge might be bland without seasoning, she salted it. Respecting her husband's decision, she asks if their servant is there and requests to take away the served table and bring a new one, asserting to make sure to never add seasoning to her beloved's food while he cries. After another running session in the forest, more deadlift training, climbing, and readings, Choi atop a mountain thinks time flew by quickly. The day of Queen Sojin's birthday banquet arrives. A man makes a presentation by standing on a horse. Sojin is delighted, saying that Ryugu's riding talent has reached a new level. The king also appeared happy, but he was actually very sad about the state of his vision. The Crown Prince says it's our protagonist's turn, and everyone thinks he will perform like street performers. Choi asks if he mentioned the book, and the Crown Prince says that when he told the princess that he lifts 112 kilograms, she didn't believe it. So he asks Choi to proceed with the plan, because his father will surely show interest in the book. The prince then says seriously that this is something he really wants from his brother. During Queen Sojin's birthday party, Prince Jinyang's turn to present arrived. He squats and congratulates his mother on her birthday, because the fact that he exists in that world is all thanks to the divine kindness of the king and Her Majesty the Queen. With that in mind, he created the Corporal Construction Secretary, which means healthy discipline for self-enlightenment and the development of a fit body. The king asks Yu what that huge iron object behind him is and what he's trying to show. Choi says he prepared something small just to repay his kindness, and as he holds the bar, he says he's overwhelmed with countless emotions. He removes his cloak, showing his exceptional body to everyone, saying that what they are seeing today is something granted by both of his parents. At Queen Sojin's birthday in the year 1438, the ceremony that changed the course of history unfolds now. The soldiers are stunned, saying they've never seen a body like this in their lives and wondering if this is the prince they know. Choi then says he will start, and everyone wonders what he will do. He lies down on the bench press with the weights and begins repetitions. Once again, he surprises others and continues his repetitions one after another. The soldiers don't understand where he got all that strength. Then the bench press set ends successfully. Choi says that one of the important activities in his book is this exercise called bench press. Through it, one can train the chest, shoulders, and arms. The queen applauds but says she doesn't understand what she just saw and asks how much it all weighs. Choi asserts that the bar weighs 24 kilograms and the cylindrical plates combined weigh about 144 kilograms. In total, the weight is 168 kilograms, which impresses the king and the queen. Choi then presents his next exercise, the squat. The exercise involves lifting a large bar on the shoulders and using the power of the legs to sit and stand repeatedly. This technique not only trains the legs but also the glutes, waist, and lower abdomen. The queen despairs, telling her son to stop it immediately. However, the second prince ignores her and says he will now do the squats. He takes the bar off the rack and rests it on his trapezius with the low bar technique. Choi then squats like he never squatted before. He focuses on the eccentric phase and gathers all his strength to do the concentric, and he finishes his movement with 204 kilograms. The queen is surprised that her son managed to stand up, and the king asks his servant to call a doctor, asking if it's even possible for the human body, but his servant also doesn't know. But this spectacle seems to be related to the so-called healthy discipline. Choi then presents the last activity called deadlift, and for that, the largest iron bar is used. Everyone goes crazy with what was said, and the crown prince decides to intervene in his father's conversation. He says he's worried that Yu's waist might be injured. With the king's permission, he says he will take some precautionary measures, thus putting a belt around his brother's core. For a brief moment, the two look at each other fearfully, because now the weight is 240 kilograms. Choi tells his father and mother that since they granted him a body capable of using such power, he will continue to care for it properly and fulfill his duties. The inspection members comment among themselves that the prince must have lost his mind and gone crazy. Choi asserts that he could have handled more weight than that, but from his current body, this weight is overwhelming. Although the belt around the waist helps a little, this plan is still completely absurd. To reach 375 kilograms in the big 3 exercises in just 2 years. Finally, he thinks that it can't be avoided, and he has no choice but to use the sumo deadlift style. He then prepares himself, taking a deep breath and gripping his hands against the bar, thus beginning the weightlifting work. Everyone realizes that the bar is going up and wonders if it's really possible for this massive iron to be lifted by just one person. As the weight goes up, his hands begin to bleed. But Choi doesn't give up and finishes his movement perfectly. The queen's pressure lowered while the king remained impressed. The prince lets the bar fall, causing the ground to break, resulting in an incredible spectacle for everyone. People are amazed at what they have just witnessed, and the queen prepares to take action. She gets up with a serious face, and the king doesn't understand why. Addressing her son, she goes to check his hand that got cut during the movement. She says he's been using these irons daily for 2 years, and now his hands are like this, asking what he means by this filial piety talk. Seeing him train his body to this extreme makes her tears flow incessantly. The women present sympathize with the queen's feelings and start crying too. A man says he knows that those who master martial arts can show visible muscles in the abdomen, but having such a distinct texture is incredible. The king asserts that indeed he personally tested the regimen from his book and showed hard work, but he says he has one thing to ask, questioning the purpose of the healthy discipline he showed on this occasion. Choi asserts that it's to establish and perfectly prepare the body they both granted him. The king asks if lifting that weight today would be the standard, as in that case he would fear his instructions might haunt the weaker ones. Choi explains that it's nothing like that because he started this discipline to get rid of the fat in his abdomen, and his strength naturally increased in the process. And that in just 3 months, his limbs move smoothly and his fatigue has disappeared. Sejong says he knows that he and the crown prince authored books about this and asserts that he will read and distinguish right from wrong, commenting that afterward, they will discuss the corporal construction secretary at the palace, which makes Choi extremely happy. Furthermore, the king asserts that the royal title of Grand Prince Jinyang no longer seems satisfactory, because he invented a discipline and took it to its peak. He suggests adding Su from Soyambu to his name. His name will now be Grand Prince Suang. In his chambers, the king realizes that the book is truly extraordinary, and questions because even if Jinyang was helped until then, he wasn't that wise. The crown prince said that he also read the book and was amazed. He simply compiled the regimen that you created in those books. Unlike other books, there's a diagram he specifically placed at the end of volume 1. The king then says he will check. He reads about changes in dietary habits in children's bodies that the prince recorded. It says that if you cook rice with 6 kilograms of grains, an adult can eat for 10 days while children can fill their stomachs twice as much. On the other hand, excess food results in excessive fat, and a spoon of sesame oil every day overflows children's bodies with strength. Meanwhile, a person with a full stomach gains more than 300 grams of excess fat in a month. After reading that, the king thinks about excessive fat and looks at his belly. On the other side of the palace, Choi asks his older brother about their father's response, and the crown prince replies that he decided to give the corporal construction secretary a chance. Choi asserts that he's already fully prepared, and that since it's the first day, he will only explain the posture, but the crown prince cuts his excitement, stating that with national affairs overflowing, it was suggested to wait for an auspicious day before continuing with the discussions. Choi asks what day that is because if it takes too long, his vision will deteriorate to blindness. He then quotes a saying that says the hardest part of a healthy lifestyle is starting, and if the great king doesn't come to him, he will have no choice but to visit him himself. Choi then runs out, and the crown prince tells him to wait for him. The guards assert that there are rules in the palace and tell him to get up. However, the prince is adamant and tells them to throw him out with all their physical strength if they can, then being taken away by 3 of the guards. Suddenly, the king appears, asking what's happening there. He finds the second prince kneeling with his book. Sejong says they are causing disturbances in the royal palace in broad daylight and asks if they forgot their dignity. Choi then addresses his father and says there's something that needs to be discussed. The king says if it's about the corporal construction secretary, he already read and warned that he would try it when he had time. But his son asserts that the correct approach to the corporal construction secretary is to start as soon as possible and do it consistently. The two then stare at each other with this duality of thoughts. Sejong asked if the second prince wrote the book suspecting he had a disease, and Choi asserts that he interfered because the signs are showing, and the book says the most appropriate thing is to treat the disease early. The king then asks his doctor what signs of illness he has, and he informs that he only sweats deeply and drinks a lot of water. Choi thinks it's obvious why the king brought his doctor, and Sejong uses him to say he has no signs. Our prince thought he must have read the diagram of the book and been seriously contemplating his illness. The issue is that he just hated to exercise. So all that needs to be done is to give him a push. Choi then says that considering the symptoms, he believes it might be type 2 diabetes. He asserted that he tried to put his body in a similar condition, making everyone surprised. However, he never actually put himself in such a situation. Diabetes is a disease where excess yang kai destroys the body, and as we know, sugar is also used as medicine to replenish yang kai. So consuming a lot of grain syrup or caramel can cause temporary diabetes, and as a result of experiencing this, he often became extremely thirsty and drank a bucket of water. Furthermore, his vision often darkened due to excessive fatigue, and he fell asleep on the spot. Hearing all this information, the king identifies. In turn, Choi asks if these symptoms are the same as his father experienced. But in reality, he was lying when he said he had already put himself in that situation. He just resurrected knowledge from the modern world. Furthermore, to convince the great king, he must be able to lie, but unknowingly, he ended up deceiving even his brother. The king asks how long it will take for him to cure his illness if he masters the corporal construction secretary, and the prince asserts that it will take 5 days. Facing this, the king accepts and says if he doesn't improve in 5 days, he will accuse him of crime for deceiving the king. In the training field, the second prince asserts that his father needs to mount the horse a little faster. The king thinks his whole insides will be twisted, and the second prince says he shouldn't lower his body. Sejong thinks his son is being too strict with him and wonders how long he'll have to continue this. Choi warned that since an hour had passed, they could end, and his father was happy. However, he was just talking about warming up. While doing squats, Choi tells his father that he should exhale when exerting his force and inhale when relaxing. He says that doing 24 repetitions is enough and that he should firmly support his back against the bench, also observing the width of his legs and leaning his body forward. A servant of your majesty says it's time for the royal meal, and the king asks him to bring it to him. However, it's just a small and tasteless meal, which leaves the king extremely unhappy. While eating, he thinks this rice texture is horrible and that eating horse feed is better than this. He then bangs his spoon against the table and demands the royal chef be brought immediately. The servant said he would call, and the king becomes increasingly irritated, saying to take that away from his table and calling the food disgusting. He asks where the meat in the soup went and why there's only tofu and radish slices. The only piece of meat has no fat and he can't even eat it. While asking to throw it to the horses, Choi enters the hall with a frightening look, asking if the food doesn't suit his father's taste. He said he prepared this meal especially for him. Because to control sugar levels, both grain syrup and honey were removed, and germinated brown rice keeps the feeling of satiety for a long time. Plus, tofu is a useful substitute for meat. Sejong, enraged, says that it's not delicious at all. Choi then apologizes to his father for what he's about to say, but asks if he didn't already absolutely agree to follow his words for the next 6 months. He said he learned in the Analects that a wise man regards promises as high as his life, and he says he's willing to do the unimaginable for such a promise, asking if the king can't fulfill even such a simple one. Sejong starts eating silently and wonders who he took after to be so stubborn. Already in his room, he writes on a scroll with his brush while his hand trembles. He tells a servant that he moved the brush incorrectly, so he should ask the factory to send a new one. Sejong thinks that since he started lifting weights, he doesn't even have the strength to hold the brush. He asserts that it's been 2 weeks since he started doing this, but still doesn't know the meaning. His belly then starts rumbling, and he asks someone to bring him something. But Choi's eye peers through the door, making the king almost jump out of his skin. He apologized to your majesty and said he suspected something was wrong when he stopped mid-sentence. Sejong then says he can go and thinks that this wretch may even appear in his dreams. The candle goes out and the king prepares to sleep. He thought he couldn't fulfill his duties because of that brat, and that if he hadn't promised, he would have stopped long ago. Night falls and the servants guarding the king's door are surprised. They think it's serious because the king usually tells the servants to leave because he snores, and just 2 weeks ago, he couldn't even breathe properly, tossing and turning all the time. But now the king is sleeping soundly, and in his dreams, he imagines himself training and with a beautiful body, which makes him very happy. Finally, the 1-month result of the corporal construction secretary has arrived. Choi asks who's there and realizes there's someone sleeping. The man wonders what's going on and starts hallucinating about the king's second son. He talks to his doll and comments on the deadline for the production of the armillary sphere. The man then, with a strange smile, asks the doll if his majesty will expel him when the high-torque water clock is ready, saying he knew. He asks if he wasn't the king's object, and wonders where his life went wrong while laughing. Amidst his hallucinations, Choi interrupts him, making him realize there's someone else in the room. He apologizes for showing an unfavorable side of himself and asks why he's there. The second commander and Deputy Jang is a genius who went from being a slave to being promoted very quickly to the position of a third-ranking official. As a royal engineer who has significantly contributed to the development of Joseon. Even in modern times, he is often mentioned as an excellent scientist. But somehow his image seemed different from what Choi imagined. While thinking if scientists were really like that, Choi says he would like him to do something for him, and hands him a royal order from His Majesty the King. Upon hearing the words royal order, the scientist enters into total despair. Choi asks him to calm down because he hasn't even reached the main point yet. He asks if the scientist knows about the regimen of the Corporal Construction Secretary, and Jang affirms that he saw him perform it firsthand, remembering that it was truly amazing. Choi says this will expedite the conversation because His Majesty is learning the technique, but the problem is that the gays are getting colder and can't go out. He then would like to request that he create something that can make him feel like he's running in a field even while inside a room. Jang says that this device is something he has never made in his entire life, so he will need time to understand. And since he has a mountain of backlog work, it may be that he can only do it after a few years, which makes Choi think that making a treadmill may be difficult. He then says he will have to find a better way because His Majesty is suffering greatly from his techniques. And thinking about the pain the king is already going through, it may be too early for him to use the step device. Jang asks if the regimen proposed by the prince isn't intended to make the body healthy, and Choi affirms that the weights increase according to the level. There have been many times when he felt pain in his arms, legs, and stomach, and even now that time makes him tremble. Thinking that the prince's method is distressing, he says he would like to refuse if it were up to him. But it seems he has no choice but to do it quickly because it's a royal order. He then says he will draft it immediately and asks him to accompany him, but the prince in turn asks if it won't take years. Jang explains that if they make it with wood like in the picture, it will break quickly, but if they make it with a steel plate, it will be much heavier. So the engineer draws something similar to a hamster wheel, and Choi thinks it makes sense. The prince asks if it will take a month, but Jang affirms that if there are no extravagant decorations, 10 days will be enough. Choi is impressed with the time, asking about the work he has, but Jang affirms that since it's a royal order, he has to work hard. This wasn't his real intention, but for the prince, everything was fine. 10 days later, Choi presents the step device to the crown prince. He says it's a relief to be able to exercise within the palace, but he's worried because the father is the first to use it. Choi then says not to worry because he has already tested it and there are no problems with its operation. His brother says it would be good if everyone were like him, but their father is still a beginner, and you would feel more at ease if someone who doesn't train tested it first. The second prince then smiles and says he has the perfect person for that. The protagonist's brother asks if he's talking about him and that he shouldn't joke like that. He says he doesn't know about the others, but he resembles the father in hating exercises. However, the speeches didn't work and the first prince was put on the wheel to run. Our hero tells him to keep running because only a quarter of an hour has passed. Later, the first prince asks why he also has to do bench presses. And the second one says that someone with a good appearance like his not preparing his body is a shame, so he should do more repetitions. Thinking his brother wants to torture him, the first prince complains while doing his exercise. But Choi asks for more repetitions even though his brother complains a lot. Later, the first prince asks him to be honest because he did 12 squat repetitions before, then asks if his brother is trying to deceive him by increasing the number. Choi affirms that his calculation method changes depending on how the muscles look and asks him to maintain the correct position. He informs that his brother's knees buckled again, and that his back is too inclined forward. The first prince cries, asking for his kind brother to come back. But Choi affirms that he may be a wicked spirit for the sake of his brother's body and will consider that he will behave and prepare his body now. Amid dumbbells, a scream echoes through the palace. The king runs on the wooden wheel, and the second prince affirms that there are only 15 minutes left. The great king was breathless after running for just 15 minutes at first, but now even an hour is easy. His brother also, who at first could only do 12 repetitions in bench presses, showing that this family's talent is unquestionably of another level. The interim second commander also had a considerable role. It's already excellent that he made the step device with the technology of this era, but he requested a field study to find areas for improvement. Choi wondered why his image was different compared to history. But as expected of the greatest scientist of Joseon, he has an extraordinary sense of responsibility. People comment that the king has lost a lot of weight recently and are worried if he got sick or something. One of the men says that Sigjeon got so tired of exercising with the great Prince Suing that he put political affairs on the back burner. It's in His Majesty's nature to learn any new subject of study, and the great prince is making good use of this trait. The servant told the first prince that everyone was talking about it and didn't tell His Highness to not make him worried. The first prince tells him not to say such things because he also lost extra fat since he started exercising and his father is going through the same. The doctor then asks if rapid fat loss isn't also a symptom of diabetes. and they all start discussing that they can't believe in this situation where the regimen for a healthy body actually harms health. They say they should file a petition asking His Majesty to stop at least for a day. The king then appears asking why they are making such a fuss, and everyone is surprised by the king's new appearance. He then asked again but demonstrates a completely different aura with a much healthier, imposing body. Choi warns that the doctor doesn't need to worry because according to the records of the royal clinic, he's sweating much more and the amount of water consumed has decreased. The doctor asks what will happen if it's really a symptom, and Choi warns that they are only halfway through the promised 6 months. He then asks his brother to wait and see because muscles don't lie. With calluses on his hands, the second prince thinks that time is passing too fast and his life in the 21st century seems just like a dream now. Suddenly, a person approaches talking to the great prince. It was the chief of inspection who incriminated him. He says that the prince entered the office again before sunrise this morning, and Choi asks what an inspector general is doing there so early. The chief says that His Majesty complains of fatigue and has less time to engage in political affairs, so he came there to relieve the burden of the king. Choi smiles, saying that he's working hard and that both want to protect the king's health, and asks if the inspector has any plan to behave and prepare the body. In turn, the inspection chief says that unfortunately, he has a lot of work to do, and as an official, he can't only think about his safety. Choi says he's not as well versed as the inspector when it comes to public sector matters, but if he spends 2 hours exercising, he can dedicate even more in his remaining 22 hours. However, the chief says it may be the opposite, with 22 hours of service being ruined by those 2 hours. Finally, he says he only wishes the best for His Majesty's health. While walking through the snow, he informs that the 6 months he promised will be ending soon. The Inspection General is an organization that investigates the misconduct of all high-ranking officials and reports them. Impeachment based on official rumors can only be impeached based on rumors. Not requiring evidence for a claim, it's okay not to provide any basis for their allegations. They followed only the principles and were objects of fear for the officials. One of the inspectors says that tomorrow is finally the day of military training, and that the chief must make a decision now. All the members of the inspection went to the king and knelt down asking him to reconsider. The king, in turn, asked what brought them there in such a hurry. The chief asks him to stop the bodybuilding secretary's regimen. All disciplines can take time to master. However, the gravity of the matter is different because political duties are more important than anything else. Even though he has never neglected his political duties due to exercises, the inspection chief says the king must set an example. They claim to be concerned that he is just learning a strange discipline and going against established principles. With a serious look, the king says the inspector's problem is affirming only his principles, and sometimes he wonders if this is loyalty or a challenge. The atmosphere becomes tense, and the king asks about the principles mentioned, informing that the reason he learns the bodybuilding secretary is to improve his body and set an example in military training. Among the soldiers, one asserts that it is very dangerous because military training is a law created by the great King Taejo. Another says that if he is not good at riding horses, he may be in danger, followed by another who asserts that even young people take a year to shoot an arrow on a moving horse. But Sejong remains determined, saying only that one of the royal guards should stay by his side to prevent accidents. The inspector general prepares to give another opinion. However, he is interrupted by the king, who says that if he sets an example in military training, the effectiveness of bodybuilding training will be proven. And then at that moment, he hopes everyone will do at least half of what he did. Our video ends here. If you liked it, leave your like. See you next time. Bye-bye.